Hello everyone, and welcome to the Canadian Podcow, where we take a closer look at the forces shaping the dairy industry. I'm Sarah Sache, and joining me is my friend Andrew Campbell. Hello, Andrew.
Oh, Sarah, I am looking out. So I record from my barn office that looks out of the barn. The curtains are wide open. The sun is shining. It is magic here in Ontario today.
That's great. It sounds like spring break in Ontario, because it's sure not nice here.
Oh. Well, now
But back to your barn office. So I've been following a little bit on the everyday fresh air business because, you do dabble in media here and there. And I noticed your kids making some content where everyone parks their boots at the door of your office. And I mean, I've been on a lot of these episodes where we've been talking, you've been sitting in your office. I have never once thought about you sitting there in your socks.
I actually have slippers. I have barn slippers. See here. 2 seconds.
So when I noticed this, I was like, man, we need to talk about this on the podcast because honestly, I am impressed. This is a next level barn tidiness to keep your office manure free. So well done.
I do keep the manure free level is definitely up here. This is kind of an elevated office that looks out over the barn.
There's like a couple of steps, robot barn style.
I do. It's a harder time because everybody kicks off their boot on the steps, sometimes kids especially. So, but I keep that all mopped, and then the hallway I mop somewhat regularly. It gets, the closer you get to the barn, the dirtier it gets. But the rule is no dirty boots or shoes or anything in here because I like it cleaner so I can wear my slippers.
Well, respect. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about things within our control, such as keeping our barn offices super clean, and things outside of our control, such as market forces. And for that, we have a super awesome guest coming.
We do, absolutely. And it's one of those things that, depending on where you sit, whether it's farmer, processor, policymaker, an outlook on where the dairy market is and what that outlook looks like can be very different.
So today we're going to unpack the dairy market outlook with a familiar guest, where prices are heading, what's driving supply, and how international trade dynamics are influencing the bigger picture.
We'll also touch on what that means for producers on the ground, especially as margins remain tight and uncertainty in, these times sticks around for all of us.
Main theme of the times. The goal here is simple. We're going to cut through the noise, give you a clear sense of what to watch for in the months ahead in the dairy industry.
Because whether you're in the industry or just following along with us, these trends matter. So let's get to it on the Canadian Podcow.
Our guest today is Maxime Collette, lead policy analysis from the Dairy Farmers of Canada. Maxime, welcome to the Podcow.
Thanks for inviting me again.
Well, it's one of our favorite episodes. This time, the last few times we've been able to do it in person, but we thought we better grab you virtually this time, just to kind of give us a rundown and give us a bit of an update in terms of just where the dairy industry is looking at. We had you kind of in the 2025, 2024 history. Can you give us an idea? Can you maybe compare to over those last few years what it's like? How many farms are out there? What's production looked like? What's really happened with revenue? Kind of that overview look, compared to the last few years we've spoken.
Yeah, so when we look at the different indicator, we can see that there was a decline in the number of dairy farm in Canada. So in 2025, the number of dairy farm was estimated at 9,048 dairy farms in Canada. The decline trend is consistent with the historical decline rate, so it's more or less normal in this case. On the other hand, the average herd size increased. Now it's reached 107 cows per farm in Canada. The total milk production reached 9.7 billion liter in 2025. It's an increase compared to 2024 of 1.2%. The production generated approximately $10 billion in revenue at the farm level in Canada. And finally, on the last indicator, when we divide the revenue by the production, you get an average of $102.94 per hectoliter, which is an increase compared to last year.
So numbers starting with B, like billions, this is big numbers that we're talking about. How would you evaluate the economic impact of the Canadian dairy industry in the broader context of the Canadian economy?
Yeah, the Canadian dairy industry is a significant contributor to the Canadian economy, especially in the rural area. So when we look at the different number, we can see that it supports more than 270,000 full-time equivalent jobs, contributes to 28.1 billion to the GDP, and generates 9.2 billion in tax revenue. So you can see that those number as they are significant, and that can show like the magnitude of the contribution of the dairy Canadian industry and in the rural area and to the Canadian total GDP.
Can you maybe compare that, Maxime, to the U.S. industry a little bit in terms of, you talked about kind of the decline in the number of farms, but obviously we see some big production numbers, components, things like that. How does that compare to where the U.S. has been over the last couple of years?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the number of dairy farm declined in Canada compared to last year. And I think it's important to know that some level of consolidation is actually quite common across many agricultural commodities and even other industries. When we do the comparison with the US, we can see that the decline rate in Canada is much lower compared to the decline rate in the US. As an example, when we do the 2014 to 2024 period, we can see an average decline in the US of minus 5.7%, while in Canada it was minus 2.6%. So there is a significant difference in the US. I would say another element is that since 2019, the US has lost the equivalence of the total dairy farms in Canada. So more or less 9,000 farms disappeared since 2019, so which is quite significant in terms of reduction or consolidation in the US. Under the Canadian system, it's a supply and managed sector, so it gives more stable price, which helps smaller or bigger farms to anticipate what will be the price in the coming months or years. So that helps to plan for investment and stay relatively in the market at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's definitely a big one. There's all types of trends on pricing that we could talk about, but I think if we start out with farm gate milk price and how that impacts the industry, can you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, so the CDC announced a price adjustment in last November. So a price adjustment that came into effect on February 1st, resulting in a price increase of 2.3% for the milk at the farm level. This price adjustment doesn't affect all the milk solid prices. In fact, in some milk classes, the milk solid prices are linked with the international price. So if on the international market there is a decrease, there will be a decrease for those milk component prices in specific milk classes.
When you do talk about that blend price, Maxime, I guess that kind of brings in just what the global dairy market does look like. There's lots of fluctuation happening and volatility happening in a lot of markets right now. I'm curious, what that does to a sector like ours. What that fluctuation does. Where the U.S. production and export numbers are, and how that ties back to kind of what the Canadian blend price looks like on average across the country, especially going into 2026, just knowing that, okay, we do have the CDC increase, but that is tied back to some challenges that producers in the U.S. might be facing.
Yeah, so on the international market, as I said earlier, there is a portion in the milk classes that the prices are linked to the international prices. So when we look at the butter price as an example, we saw a decline in 2025 versus 2024. A dip was observed in the second half of 2025. In early 2026, we started to see an increase from that dip on the butter international prices. So that remains to be monitored. On the S&P side, so the skim milk powder, it's relatively the same trend. So a dip observed in the second half of 2025, and we started to see an increase from that dip in the beginning of 2026. So, I mean, this is a good news in milk classes that are linked with international prices to see that increase from the dip seen in 2025.
And how about over on the consumer side? I mean, there is no market for us without consumers. Canada's population has been growing, but there has been shifts announced by governments and various factors that influence this. I mean, we're trying to make sure on our side that we meet it with the appropriate product mix, but beyond that, what can you see in terms of the trends coming our way in terms of population and consumers and that side of things?
Yeah, on the Canadian population side, it's important to remember that we have seen an important growth rate between 2022 and 2024 that was largely driven by historically high levels of immigration. So for the dairy sector, this rise has contributed significantly to, the demand and at the end of the day, the production. However, the rapid expansion of the population put pressure on the broader economy. So in response, the federal government introduced tighter immigration policies beginning in 2024, leading to a slowdown in population growth in 2025 and for the following years. So when we look at the forecast made by StatCan in this case, the expected growth is between 0% and 0.4% in 2028. So we should see a much lower growth rate in terms of population growth in this case.
So population growth maybe, basically flat lines, in the near term. I think one of the other challenges that we all are looking at, particularly right now and over the last few weeks, are, higher energy prices, more concern about what that does to the overall, food inflation. I guess I wonder, how does the concern in spending, and just that cash crunch that consumers, whether they feel it or not, but feel like they are going to feel it, how is that going to start impacting, where and what they spend their food dollar at?
Yeah, that's interesting, because since the increase in interest rate made by the Bank of Canada in 2022, we saw an increase in the share of the disposable income that is reserved to reimburse mortgage or the rental housing fees. So there is a bigger share in the disposable income now that is reserved for that, which put pressure on the other categories of expenditure. So we saw strategies from the consumer in order to reduce the other expenditures, such as the food, or maintain maybe the same level in terms of food expenditure. So for the food expenditure, we saw a shift from conventional grocery stores to discount banners, or reducing spending on the food service side. So that was seen in order to control the pressure, or reduce the pressure that was created by higher share of the mortgage and the rental fees in the disposable income. Recently, the food price index increased by 3.2% when we look at 2025 versus 2024. For dairy product price index, it's a 2.1% increase, which is in line with the general inflation. Which is a good news. We are below the food price inflation in this case. which I mean is good for the consumer to have a relatively stable price, and then they can plan to continue purchase dairy product in the future.
So how are we holding up in this context in terms of like share of basket, if you will, or like are people still putting dairy products in their carts? And what can you tell us specifically about dairy consumption trends as we move through this time of people being really careful about where they place their dollars?
Yeah, I mean, for dairy products, they still continue to consume them. Like in the latest 12 months, we saw an increase in consumption for most of the big major dairy categories. Of course, that was driven by the population growth in 2025. So this one was estimated at 0.9%. When we look at the per capita consumption trend, it is a bit different. We saw a decrease on the per capita basis for milk and cream. However, we saw an increase for refrigerated yogurt and butter. So, for cheese, it was relatively stable. So it's just, consumers are changing their consumption habit. They are adjusting to the current situation. They are consuming differently. They are snacking more. They are breakfast. They spend less time to breakfast. So, which has an incidence on the different category, which is positive or negative. But dairy is an important category in the food basket for sure.
Now, in that food basket, too, though, I know there has been concern in the industry for a long time in terms of, the plant-based beverages, and does that displace some of that dairy consumption in consumers' grocery cart? There was a lot of talk of it then. You still see some pretty flashy ads today, but I mean, do you see it as, is that consumption still rising? Was it just a fad and has dropped? Where do consumers place plant-based beverages?
Yeah, when we look at the market share of plant-based, we saw a peak in the market share in 2022. Since then, it's been decreasing the market share of plant-based beverages in the milk and plant-based category. This is explained by the economic context, as I was saying earlier. Consumers face more pressure on their expenditure, and we saw a shift from plant-based towards milk in certain cases. There was also the listeria, so the recall in 2024 that impacted negatively the plant-based beverages category, and we saw as well during that situation a shift towards milk. So that contributed positively to the milk consumption.
All right, interesting stuff. I always enjoy these episodes, but we do have to take a short break at this time. After that, we'll be back to dig deeper into the dairy market outlook for the months ahead. Stay right here.
Strong and free. It's not just in our anthem, it's in who we are. A freedom to choose what's best for us. That's why Canadian dairy farmers uphold some of the highest standards in the world, proudly helping to strengthen our communities. When you choose Canadian, you're making all of us stronger.
That's the Canadian way.
And we're back with Maxime Collette, lead policy analysis at Dairy Farmers of Canada. So Maxime, we've covered the consumption side of the supply chain. Tell us about the fresh milk retail prices and how Canadian dairy compares internationally.
In terms of comparison with other countries, when we look at the Canadian average for fresh milk for the retail price, we see that the Canada is comparable with other countries. Is a little bit higher compared to the US. However, it's relatively the same price with New Zealand. New Zealand, it's a free market. It's an important producer around the world. So here, I mean, we can see that supply management doesn't result in a higher price at the retail level. When we compare with New Zealand, we can see that we have similar prices for fresh milk.
Is it the same picture, Maxime, for your butter, your cheese, your yogurt? Is it pretty similar in terms of a few lower, but maybe a few the same?
Yeah, it's really there that it is interesting, because when we think about like the supply management, we often compare only the fresh milk price, but we often forget about the other commodities and the other dairy product in this case. So when we do the comparison with the United States, we can see that prices in Canada, they were lower for cream, refrigerated yogurt, and butter in Canada versus in the US. And we have looked at two databases in order to see if there was the similar story, and it is the case. For cheese, it depends from the database. There is one that we see that prices are higher in Canada for cheddar than mozzarella compared to the US, while the other database shows that it's the cheese are higher in terms of prices compared to Canada. So I would say it's relatively similar. So at the end of the day, we have for other dairy products lower prices or similar prices in Canada versus the US.
So flipping back to the fluid milk side for a minute, what's happening with milk consumption trends both here in Canada and around the world? Is the per capita consumption changing, and what's driving those shifts in terms of, how much milk people are actually drinking, or are they eating it? What are they doing? And what do you think that the forecasts show for that into the future?
Yeah, we have looked at an exercise done by the International Dairy Federation that surveyed 17 countries in the world, and we can see for milk there is a decline in consumption that is expected for the following years. But it's not only for Canada; it is expected across all Western countries such as North America, Europe, and Australia. And this trend is explained by the fact that the consumer are changing in terms of eating habits. As I said earlier, they snack more, they take less time for breakfast, which has a negative impact on the milk consumption. In some countries, there is an increase in demand for plant-based beverages. In Canada, as I said earlier, it's less the case in the recent years, but that situation can change in the future. Specific to Canada, the demographic change contributed to the decline. So the youngest generation, they drink less milk, but they take more and more spaces in the population distribution. So that has a negative impact, and that will have a negative impact in the future on the consumption trend. When we look at the current consumption, we can see that Canada remains in the average with a consumption that is estimated at 57.5 liter per person. So we are in the average in terms of consumption per person.
Then in terms of that's, kind of the fluid and just kind of the consumption side, but obviously we've got all of the other products that go with that. And we have seen some, changing trends over the years in terms of where, and specifically the one I want to start with is kind of more on the butterfat side in terms of the cream consumption. Ice cream is kind of that indulgent treat. We've seen some positive trends over the last year in that. Is that continuing to evolve? And what factors do you think are going to continue to shape really where that cream demand is going to go? Yeah,
for cream, it looks good in the future. A growth is expected for the vast majority of the countries studied in that survey. And the main element is like its characteristic. So cream, has the ability to enhance the taste and the recipe. It's easy to cook with. So those are characteristics that consumers are seeking. On the other hand, in some countries, the rise of plant-based alternative and the changing in consumption habits will have an impact on slowing a little bit the growth of the cream that is expected. But that's a product that should continue to increase in the future. For ice cream, I would say that it's also a product that should continue to grow. Ice cream is really linked to emotion. It's a product that brings experience, that you can have an activity in family and with friends to have a ice cream cone during the summer, the hot summer days. Also, the ice cream can bring a lot of taste, so it boosts, the consumption by, stimulating the discovery of or try to find a new taste in that category. So because of his characteristic, that will continue to positively contribute to the increase in consumption.
Well, my family definitely goes out for ice cream more than a little bit often, I will say. But I think like a lot of women, for me, I don't drink a lot of milk, like in terms of a glass of milk, but I definitely love to eat yogurt and cheese. And these days, cottage cheese is all the rage. Everybody's eating cottage cheese. So what kind of role will these types of products continue to play as drivers of consumer diets? What kind of makes them advance it, or what is the outlook like in terms of these processed type of products?
Yeah, for yogurt, growth is expected as well, not only in Canada, but in other countries. It's really the changing habit. So as I said earlier, the consumer are snacking more. There is a decline in traditional breakfast. So yogurt is really benefiting from that. It's also benefiting for the rising demand for protein. You were referring about the cottage. So the cottage, skyr yogurt, and the Greek yogurt are benefiting from that trend as well, because they have a high protein content in their composition. There is also the health trend that is sought after by some consumer, and yogurt and cottage cheese are benefiting from that as well. Overall, for the cheese category, that's a product that should continue to grow. It is versatile. It's easy to cook with. And for this type of product, I have the average consumption in Canada. So it was estimated in 2024 at 14 kilograms per person. Canada ranks in the bottom third in terms of countries studied. So there is room for improvement in this case, but it looks good for the future.
Then the last category, Maxime, I want to touch on is butter, because I think what we have seen, because it was traditionally, as we see a lot of growth in those protein ones. I mean, if I think back that, 10, maybe 12 years ago, we saw that huge increase in demand in butter, then some softening in it as, for a number of reasons. I guess I'm kind of curious is where does that butter outlook then fit in terms of where consumers think it fits with their diet, their baking needs, all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, for butter, growth is expected as well. More in not for all the countries surveyed in the IDF study, but more in North America and in countries of the global South. I would say one of the reasons is that there is an increasing demand for natural and less processed product. As you know, butter, it's the ingredient, it's only cream and salt. So the list of ingredients is quite short. So it's really seen as a high quality product, and its characteristic helps as well to the growth. It's easy to cook with, a little bit similar to the cream here. It's easy to cook with, and it enhances the taste and recipe. So those characteristics will continue to positively impact the consumption upwards in the future.
Can't make a good scrambled egg without it, huh? So as we wrap up, what would you say are the key takeaways for the dairy market outlook, both in Canada and globally? Is there anything that we should really be keeping in mind as dairy farmers as we start planning for the next few years?
Yeah, when we do the comparison overall, we can see that Canada, in terms of growth, is expected to be at least equal, if not greater than, the average for the countries that was participating in the International Dairy Federation survey. At the end, it's a good news for producer. If there is an increase in demand, likely it's going to translate into an increase in production. So we will need the producer to increase their production in order to serve the coming growth in the future years.
Well, you know how to end on a positive note, Maxime. That is what every dairy farmer in Canada wants to hear. But not only that, I mean, it's always such an informative conversation we have. So, Maxime Collette, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. We always appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, Sarah, as I said, it's always good news when the economist comes in and says we're going to need more milk. That makes dairy farmers happy. It must make you happy.
Oh, of course, we do not hate that. That was, if you want to be invited back on the podcast, come on, tell us about economics, and then tell us there's going to be growth in the industry. And we're like, yes, you can come back, for sure.
Although I find it so fascinating as you do walk through the numbers in terms of, where demand is changing. It's one of those things of, what milk was to a consumer 25, 30, 40 years ago is very different to what it is to a consumer. And so I really do find it fascinating at the same time to see just where demand is and how the combination of natural and protein seem to be pretty positive outlooks for us.
Well, in my experience, teenage boys are still moving those jugs at the same rate that they always have, and that is faster than I can get them in the fridge.
Well, you know what? So that may be teenage boys. My teenage daughter had a couple of friends, and it was a case of we had to have yogurt and fruit to make smoothies because we needed the high-protein smoothie for breakfast. That was apparently all the rage if you're 14.
As long as they're keeping dairy in their fridges, we're happy with that. So that's pretty awesome.
We absolutely are. Certainly thank you all for listening to the Canadian Podcow. If you like this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues.
You could give us a follow on Blue Sky, Facebook, and YouTube, or drop us a note on the email at podcast@canadianpodcow.ca. Canadianpodcow.ca is also where you can find all of our past episodes if you're looking for those, trying to get caught up.
And from all our past episodes, you'll know we're always hugely grateful to our sponsor, the Dairy Farms of Canada, as well as our production team, Bruce Sargent and Carl Belanger. And of course, a big thanks to our guest today, Maxime Collette. We haven't scared him away yet. He keeps coming back, Sarah.
We appreciate that.
Bye for now,
guys.
everybody.